Hey there, welcome back. It's the Fully Live Athlete Pastor channel. We are on day 94 of the online Bible reading club. This is Justin speaking to you. Hey, I'm a personal trainer, but first and foremost, I'm a pastor. And I have experienced the blessings of reading the Bible and how it has given me what I like to call doxological fitness. Fitness in the sense of doxology, giving God glory, worshiping Him through body, mind, soul, spirit, relationships, all that we are, that we might know and glorify and enjoy God. And that's how you do that, is through knowing His Word, His authoritative take on who we are, who He is, and what we're called to do. And ultimately, the sufferings, the death, and the redemption and forgiveness of sins through Christ. And this is the center of history. We're all looking back to this and looking ahead to the day Christ will return and restore all things and glorify all things. Glory is where we're heading. So doxological fitness is what we're made for. But you can't get there without knowing the Bible. Every Christian needs to be reading the Bible in good chunks, so that once you get into the details and the verse by verse understanding of it, you've seen it multiple times over. Your viewpoint, your vantage point, your perspective is informed by years and years and years of digging into the big picture of how God's related. And you're going to see connections throughout the whole 66 books of the Bible, the 39 books of the Old Testament, 27 books of the New Testament, and how it all fits together. And so each day we're looking at a reading plan, which is linked below in the comments or the description of the video. Each and every day as we go, we're going to go 365 days. Each and every day read the scriptures, but you'll see that each day I'm going to make connections between the Old and the New Testament and the whole Bible in general. And you can't do that if you're not aware of what's going on in the whole. And of course, as I grow in understanding and knowing God, I'm going to make even more connections. And we see this every year as we do this. So this is going to be a game changer for you. Just commit to it. I'm behind. I'm catching up. But I want you to catch up. So the way it works is you will, if you're more of an experienced reader of the Bible, I would say go read it ahead of time. And according to the plan each day, and then come back to the video and look at what I've come up with and what you've come up with, compare notes as a review. But if you're more of an inexperienced reader of the Bible, watch the video first before you do the reading to get a heads up on what's coming, so that you can see the connections and how I make them, so that you can preview it ahead of time and get the most out of it. And I would love to hear what you're seeing in it too. So as we get into it today, we're going to look at Ruth, the whole book of Ruth. Now don't get scared now. It's only 4 chapters, but it's a very short book. A whole book that brings us, it's a bridge from Judges to the Samuel books, and it's very necessary. I'll explain why in just a minute. And then we're going to look at the beginning of chapter 8 of Luke. We're taking a lot more time in the Gospels than we are in the Old Testament, less verses per day. But it's Luke 8, 1 through 25. But even in that 25 verse block, there's a lot. Okay, so looking at Ruth. What's up with Ruth? Ruth is the following book after Judges. Judges was a train wreck, absolutely a train wreck. And you can rewind to the other videos to see all that happened there. But Ruth is where we see hope. The end of Judges is we're longing for a king, a righteous king, who's going to redeem and shepherd Israel, because they need a shepherd. They need to know God. They need someone to direct them to God. And that's what the king is going to do, a king after God's own heart, who's ultimately going to be David. But David isn't the true king of Israel. He's the type or the shadow. And it's ultimately going to be Jesus. And that's the king who's going to crush the head of the serpent, and the serpent's going to strike at his heel. And at great cost to him, he's going to shepherd and lead Israel to the true promised land, to dwelling with God forevermore in unbroken fellowship as a holy people with holy God. That's where we're heading, to glory. Now, you see that in this journey that God takes each of us on, He's going to engineer some tension and some difficulties in our lives, and where we're going to learn to either run to God and confess His sovereignty and ask for His help and plead with Him for His redemption in these times, or we're going to run away from Him and assert our own lordship. And we're going to be, like Psalm 1 is going to tell us, that we could either be like the foolish man, the scoffer, or we can be like the wise man and bear all this fruit, like a tree planted by the streams, and so we're going to be watered well and producing fruit. That's our destiny. Now, you'll see that as we get to the Luke passage, that the parable of the sower is in Luke shows that God sovereignly, will make the seed of the kingdom, the gospel, bear fruit 100 times, 100-fold over. When the seed hits, when it gets on soil that is appropriate for the kingdom blessings to come forward, it's going to multiply. And that's what you're seeing in me and in you, hopefully. You're seeing the kingdom is changing you. God is at work as a king changing you in the Luke passage. You see that. But that's not everybody. Many people hear the word of God and it never does anything for them. And you see that's how there's satanic activity involved in that parable. You see it in Luke 8 there. And you see that sometimes the cares of the world choke it out. Sometimes persecution, all kind of reasons why people don't respond, because the soil is not good for the gospel. What changes it? Well, what's the factor? God sovereignly takes depraved, wicked sinners and changes their hearts. As He's going to say in John 3, to see the kingdom of heaven, you've got to be born again. He gives you new birth in order to see the kingdom of heaven and to see and desire Jesus. None of us are going to look to Jesus for salvation if God doesn't change our hearts. Our hearts are the issues, and that's what the parable makes known. Well, you see that if God can God do this? Yes, He can. Look at what it's at the ending of these sections here. You see in Luke, the very last words we read, and up to verse 25, as you see the calming of the storm. The calming of the storm, and in that it says, "Where is your faith?" The disciples are nervous, but they don't realize, Jesus is in this boat, and so they feel like they're sailors. They're pretty experienced sailors, but Jesus is sleeping in the boat, and they think, well, we're going to be swamped, we're in great danger, and they say, Master, we're going to drown. And He gets up and He rebukes the waves with His voice, and the storm subsided there. And that is the question that they have in their minds. There is, in fear and amazement, it says, they ask one another, who is this? He commands even the waters and the waves, and they obey His voice. That's who God is. He's sovereign. And He organizes storms, difficulties, that we know that when we call out to Him, just as they came to Jesus on the boat, that God sovereignly works all things, and He can change even a sinner's wicked heart and subdue it, transform it. You see that in He's healing people, demon-possessed people. You see in the early verses of the Luke passage that's exactly what happens. Is the women are following the disciples and providing for them out of their own means, because they have been healed and seen the sovereignty of God in their own redemption. Now, going back to Ruth, the short of the story is, in the four chapters there, is that Naomi and her husband and their two sons have to go to Moab, right? Because they are without bread. And Bethlehem is ironically, literally means the house of bread, has no bread. And so there's a famine in the land of Israel, and they have to have bread. So again, the story here is looking for a king, and they need king. Their great need here is they, without a king, without a redeemer, without God, they're gonna die, and they need bread. Well, who's the bread? The bread of life is Christ, ultimately. But you're gonna see that there's a redeemer in this text, and that's the big deal, is that Naomi is going to be widowed, and her sons are going to marry Moabite women. Now, these are enemies of Israel, but that's where they are, and they marry Moabite women. And one of the Moabite women there, Ruth, named there, who's named at the book, and she, or whose namesake is the book. Ruth says she loves her mother-in-law, Naomi, and has learned her God through her, and wants her God to be her own. So she is converted and wants to go back to the land of their God. And they do. And eventually, there's a love story. Ruth meets a relative of Naomi, Boaz. And you see Boaz takes a liking to Ruth and provides for her. And then ultimately, the woman proposes to the man, to Boaz here. She's a Moabite. She doesn't know the cultural deal here. Anyway, long story short, there's uncertainty because there's another person who could become the Redeemer ahead of Boaz. So there's drama. Will her love be able to provide for her, or will she be sort of sold over, handed over to this other Redeemer? Well, the other Redeemer in chapter 4 ends up being a no Redeemer at all, a bad guy, and so he gives over his rights to Boaz and Ruth, the Moabite, and Boaz get married, and you see the very ending of this story. It's not just a cool story. There's a genealogy that leads to the king, to David. And that's the story, is that God is going to sovereignly, out of the union of one of his people and one of his natural enemies, actually, one of their actual enemies, is going to bring about the son, the offspring, who is going to crush the head of the serpent. That's going to be typified in David, but ultimately the reality will be in Christ, in that he is going to be the one who is God and man and brings God and man together and destroys the work of the devil. So there you have it. No famine, no storm, no satanic activity can master God, because he's sovereign and he will provide. Even when there's another Redeemer out there who is no Redeemer at all, he will overcome that and work all things according to his purposes. So with that said, if you're watching this, your brother and sister, keep reading, keep studying the scriptures, and we'll see you next time on the Online Bible Reading Club. God bless you. If you're watching the end, go ahead and like it, share it, comment, ask questions. I want to hear what you're learning. God bless you.